Hey chaps, I hope you're all well. Today's episode is going to be pretty much around automatic frame generation for your tile sets and saving those tile sets back to disk. The reason for this being, I was hoping to look at tile layering for this episode, but I have a large tile set that I need frames for, and manually typing them out as we would have done previously, the idea of that just made me want to die. So it made sense to actually get this done and out of the way because it's inevitable we're going to have tile sets that need frames and some may be quite large, so this is going to remove a large part of that laborious task. So what I'm going to do now is just shut my mouth and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is create a button so that when we've selected a tile set, we can click this button to then modify the properties of that tile set via a pop-up dialog. So if I head over to the editor project, right click on Form 1 CS and View Designer, in here, we're going to make some room for our new button. So what I'm going to do is click our Tileset Previewer, drag that down a little bit, head over to our toolbox, find button, and then we're going to drag one of these out into the editor. I'm going to position that underneath the combo box, and then just drag that out so it fills the width of the combo box. Okay, and then lastly, I'm just going to drag the Tileset Previewer back up till it clicks back into place. There we go, it's docked, see the vertical line. And then the next thing we're going to do is just give this button some sensible properties. So I'm going to click on the button, and in the bottom right down here, the first thing I'm going to do is give it a sensible name. So I'm going to call this button edit tileset. And then I'm going to modify the text of the button as well to say edit tileset. Lastly, I'm going to change the enabled property of this button to false because I want it to be disabled by default and only enable when I've selected a valid tileset from the combo box. So to make that happen, we need to modify some code for our handler when we've made a selection in the combo box, which we already have. We just need to extend it to set the status of the button. So if I right click on Form 1, go to View Code. In here, if I scroll down to Combo Box Tilesets, selected index changed. In here, all I'm going to do is change this code a little bit to set the state of the button, or rather set the enabled property of the button, depending on whether this tileset is null or not, i.e. have we made a valid selection. So in here, I'm just going to type button edit tileset dot enabled equals tileset different to null, or not equal to null. So basically, the button will be enabled if the tileset is set. So let's give that a quick run now. Okay, and then make a selection in the tileset combo box to mini tileset, and you'll see it then enables the button. So now we have a button. It doesn't really do anything. The next thing we need to think about is adding some functionality to that button. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create a dialog to house the properties of the tileset we want to edit. So over in the editor project, in the same folder as our new map dialog, I'm going to right click, add new item, and I'm going to add a new Windows Forms form. I'm going to call this edit tileset dialog, following the very same naming convention as our new map dialog. I'm going to add that. And the one thing I'm going to change around this dialog straight off the bat is the start position, so it spawns center of the parent window like our new map dialog does. So down here in the bottom right, I'm going to scroll down to find start position. I'm going to change this to center parent. Okay, save that, close the designer for now, and now I'm going to hop over to the code for the dialog. So I'm going to right click on the dialog, view code, and the one property we want to accept into this dialog straight off the bat is going to be a source tileset, the tileset that we're editing. So I'm going to create a public tileset, control period to add the namespace. I'm going to call this source tileset. Now I'm calling it a source tileset on purpose, and you'll see why soon. But for now, we're just going to know this is going to be the source tileset. Okay, close down the code for that for now. And over in the Form 1 Designer, we're now going to add some functionality to our Edit Tileset button. So if we double click on the button, it will create a handler for us in the Form 1 CS codebase. And in here, we want to create an instance of our new dialog. So I'm going to create an instance, edit tileset dialog. Dialog equals new dialog. And then remember, we need to set the source tileset. So the source tileset will be the combo box tileset selected item. And we're going to cast this straight to a tileset because we know we load the combo box with tilesets. So whatever the selected item is will be a tileset. Okay, and because we can only get to this handler when the button is enabled and thus a tileset is selected, we don't have to worry about this being null. So we've created the dialog, and the next thing we're going to do is show the dialog. For now, just show dialog. Okay? Give that a quick start, and then we're going to make a selection, hit the mini tile set there, and click edit tile set. But first, I'm going to set a breakpoint just at the end here before we show dialog, just to make sure it's set the property as we expect. Hit edit tile set now, have a look at dialog, and then we should be able to find in here the source tile set. I'll have a little scroll down, might take me a moment. I could just type it in to be fair. Okay, so there's the source tile set, and it is the mini tile set. Okay, so that is setting the source tile set as we expect it to. And then it'll show the dialog. Get rid of the breakpoint now. So we're showing the dialog now. We now need to think about adding some behavior to the new dialog of ours. So let's open up the designer once more for our edit tileset dialog. Double click on him to open the designer. And then what we're going to be doing is adding another instance of our Tileset Previewer. So making it a component is really proving to be helpful at this stage. So if we go to the toolbox, Tileset Previewer, and drag that out into our new dialog, and position this so it takes up most of the dialog, maybe leaves a gap at the bottom for some other stuff we're going to add soon. Okay, click on the previewer, give that a little bit more of a sensible name. I'm just going to remove the 1 in this case. And the next thing we need to do is just set the tile set in this previewer on the loading of the dialog. So if we find an empty space in the dialog along the bottom here, double click on it just to create a load handler for us. And then what we're going to do is refer to Tileset Previewer, and then we're going to set the tile set to our source tile set. Okay, so let's give that a quick run. Select the tile set, hit edit tile set, and there you have it, reaping the benefits of making this a control of our own earlier on. Okay, so with that done, let's just close this down real quick. So you may remember that previously we had 2 tile sets in the editor. If I go to the File Explorer here and have a look at our tilesets directory, we have 2 tileset images, but only one's loading up in the editor because it's only mini tileset that has an accompanying JSON file. Today we're going to reintroduce the full tileset because it's large enough to demonstrate the problem we're looking to solve. So I'm going to copy and paste mini tiles.json, rename this to full tileset.json, drag that into Visual Studio to make a small change. So I'm going to change the name to full tileset, give that a save, give the editor a quick run from Visual Studio, and you'll see that we have full tileset once more. Selecting full tileset, clicking edit, will show it's quite big and there's a lot of frames that could potentially be in here, and going through the intensive task of typing them out all manually into the JSON file would be quite laborious. So what we want to do is introduce an automated process to do that for us. And to do that, we need to know a couple of small pieces of information, primarily the tile width and tile height, so we know how many tiles we can fit into this tile set. And to enter that information, we're going to be following the pattern we previously set with our new map dialog. So I'm going to copy that dialog and I'm going to simply paste it. So we have a copy. I'm going to right click on the copy and rename this to generate frames dialog. Make sure to copy that as well, the name. So I'm just going to copy that name. And then right click on that dialog, view code, paste over the new map dialog class name and constructor. And then expand the generate frames dialog and do the same for the designer class. So double click on the designer class and paste over the class name. Okay, so close those down. We should now be able to build error free. So that's fixed the naming issues. So now all we need to do is add a button to spring open our dialog from the edit tileset dialog. So if we head over to the designer for the edit tileset dialog, open the toolbox and let's add a button in this empty space we left along the bottom. Drag that over here to the left, make it a little bit bigger, and then give it a more sensible name and text. So in the bottom right here, I'm going to change the text to generate frames and change the button to button generate frames. Okay, change the position of that a little bit. There we go. So now we just need to add a handler to our generate frames button. So if we double click on the generate frames button, we'll get our handler in the edit tileset dialog codebase. And in here, we just want to open our generate frames dialog. So create an instance of our generate frames dialog equals new dialog. And then much like the new map dialog, we want to only perform an action if the user clicks OK. So we just want to go if dialog show dialog equals OK. Remember, much of the code in this dialog is the same as the new maps dialog currently. Okay, so in here is where we then generate the frames. So with that said, let's go take a look at our generate frames dialog and tart it up a little bit. So right click on generate frames dialog, view designer. So in here we've got pretty much all the references to new map dialog, so we need to change this up a little. So first of all, let's just change the title and actually give a dialog a title for a change. So click on the dialog here. In the bottom right, let's just find text. Change this to generate frames. And then we just need tile width and tile height, so we'll just nuke map width and map height and the accompanying labels. So get rid of those, delete, move all of this up to near the top. There we go. And then change the size of the window as well. Okay. We'll no doubtedly have some complaints in the code now because we just deleted some fields. Give that a quick build. Okay, so let's go check out these errors now. So if we right click on generate frames dialog, view code, and then in here what we're going to do is just get rid of these references to map width and map height in this creation details, and then do the same in the creation details class along the bottom here. We'll also rename this to, right click rename, generation details. And that's pretty much all we need to do in this dialog. So let's close that down. Close down the designer. And let's give it a quick run to make sure it's all working as we expect, up to this stage of course. So let's select a tile set, full tile set, edit tile set, and we have our button along the bottom here. Click generate frames, and then in here it auto selects the first numeric up down field for us, tile width. So we can then make some changes. I want some tiles, 20 by 20, and then I hit enter, and then it should generate the tile frames for us, which is exactly what we want. So now we've done everything we need to do with that dialog. We now need to close this down and start adding some code in here to generate the frames for us. So the first thing we need to do is clear down the frames of the tile set because this operation is generating frames from scratch and not adding to them. So we get the source tile set, .frames, and then clear them down. We then need to establish the facts. The facts being, we need to know what the size of the frames are going to be, and then how many frames you can fit into the tile set, both horizontally and vertically. So let's get the tile width out of the dialog. So dialog.details.tile width, and then the tile height, dialog.details.tile height. Remember, this details object is an object that exists in the dialog, much like the new map dialog that we created ourselves. So then we need to work out how many tiles we can fit horizontally. So horizontal tiles or frames equals to the tile width, or rather the source tile set .texture .width divided by the tile width. And then we do something very similar for the vertical frames. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is then just create all of these frames. So let's get that started now. Just use a couple of loops. So for int, let's start with x equals 0, well, let's do y actually, and then it'll go across the x-axis first. So y equals 0, y under vertical frames, y plus plus, and then the same for x equals 0, x under horizontal frames, x plus plus. Okay, and then we need to just create a frame with this information in it. So to do that, we need a rectangle, which will be a MonoGame rectangle. So we need to make sure we're using the correct rectangle type. So we'll have to go for Microsoft.xna.framework.rectangle, because apparently we're already using the system drawing, but we're not, so actually we can remove that. So we remove system.drawing. We can go back to rectangle here. Control period, using Microsoft.xna framework, and then we'll call this frame equals new, and then the x, y, width, and height. So the x will just be the x times by tile width, and the y will be y times tile height, and then this will just simply be for the width and height, tile width, tile height. And then all we need to do is just add this frame to the tile set. So source tile set frames add frame. Okay, so there we're adding all the frames as a result of this operation. So let's see how that looks. So we hit start, head over to our tile set. So let's do the full tile set, edit tile set, generate frames. We want a tile width and height of 32 by 32, hit enter. but nothing appears to have happened. Well, the reason for that being is because we haven't told the Tileset Previewer to refresh itself. So although the frames have been updated and the Tileset Previewer does have that information, it's not yet rendered the changes. So if we close down this again, we now need to add a call to the Tileset Previewer to tell it that it is invalid and therefore needs to redraw itself. So if we go to Controls in the Editor project, right click on Tileset Previewer and View Code, you'll see in here if you scroll down to the click event, we have a call in here to invalidate on the picture box, which is very much the same thing we need to do here. So if I'm going to take this call here, and I'm going to add a new public method, just here above the click, public refresh void refresh frames. And all this is going to do is call invalidate on the picture box. I'm also going to reuse that where we call invalidate in the click handler. Okay, so now I can close down the Tileset Previewer, and in here after the for loops I'm going to basically pull out the Tileset Previewer and then call refresh frames. Tileset Previewer refresh frames. Save that. Let's give that a run. So now if I select my full tileset, edit tileset, click generate frames 32 by 32 and hit enter, we now have a plethora of frames generated for us very easily. And they all work just as much as any other frame does. So I can click on them, etc., much as I can with the others as well in the other tileset. Okay, so we have a frame generation tool, but the problem is this is not yet being saved back to the tileset on disk. This means as soon as I close the editor, these changes will not actually be saved for me. Furthermore, if I close down this window and actually change the tileset in this view here, so if I go back to the mini tileset and then back to the full tileset, you'll see that the frames have carried over. Ideally, it would be nice if we could have some changes made and then have the option to apply them instead of them being applied for us, which we could do with relative ease if we were just smarter about how we work with our tilesets. As it stands currently, we accept a source tileset, modify that tileset directly, and thus it changes the source tileset. If we take the source tileset and create a copy of it, work on the copy before then giving the option of applying it back, we then have that same effect. So what we're going to do is create a modified tileset and a source tileset. So we'll have a private tileset, source tileset here. Okay, and we're going to change this a little bit to change how it works. So what we're going to do is change this get to return source tileset, and then the set. What this is going to do is set source tileset right enough to the value, but then in doing that I'm going to create a copy of the source tileset, and we're going to call that the modified tileset. Okay, so here we're going to have the public tileset modified tileset, and that's going to be simple get and set. Okay, so if you imagine it as we create our edit tileset dialog, we set the source tileset, and in setting the source tileset we take a copy of that, and that then becomes our modified tileset, the one we're actively working on. But first we need to create a copy of the tileset, okay? So to do that, we're going to modify our tileset class a little bit. If we head over to our engine project, tile maps, tileset, in here we're going to create a couple of constructors. I say a couple because we don't currently have a default constructor and we'll need one for behaviors such as our previous implementation of from JSON file. So what we're going to do is first add a default constructor. So public tileset, there we go, and then we're going to add another constructor which takes another tileset, so we can then copy the contents of this tileset to this one. So I'll just call this source. Okay, so what we're going to do is take the contents of this tileset and apply it to this one. But because we'll need to do that in multiple different entry points, we're going to create a method for doing that specifically. And we're going to make it public. So public void apply, which then takes a source. Okay, so what that's going to do is take the contents of this one, much like the constructor will, and apply them. So what the constructor will actually do is just call apply with the source. The source. Okay, so we've got our apply, we need to then make it functional. So what we've got three things: a name, texture, and frames. So name's easy enough, I'll just take name, source.name. Texture, it's not really practical to go around copying textures in my case right now, so I'm just going to take the source.texture. The frames, however, I am going to copy. So frames equals source.frames. So that would just set these frames to those frames. What I want to do is take a copy of the source frames. So new list of rectangle, and then pass in the source frames. Okay. So now if we close the tileset class, over here where we set the tileset or the source tileset, we're then going to create our modified tileset. So modified tileset equal to new tileset, which passes in the source tileset. I'll put that in uppercase, lowercase, doesn't really matter too much. Okay, so now we've got our modified tileset. So we want to start working on that one instead of the source tileset. But of course, we've got a bunch of places where we're referring to source tileset that we need to now change. So what I'm going to do is select modified tileset, copy it, go down to where we use it. So first of all, in the load method, paste in modified tileset, and then all the way down here where we use it in all 4 places, I'm going to replace with modified tileset. So not once is it ever getting back to the source unless we consciously do it ourselves. I'm going to give this a quick start just to make sure it's not running back to the source. So if I select a full tileset, edit, generate frames, 32 by 32, enter. We have our frames. We can close this down. I can then freely go back to mini and back to full, and the changes have not been applied, so the effect is there. We do now, of course, need to apply those changes ourselves, so we need to add some functionality for doing that. So much like our new map and generate frames dialogues, we're going to be adding a couple of buttons for OK and cancel really quickly. So if we right click on edit tileset dialog, view designer, open up toolbox, and then button, drag one in, make it roughly the same size as our generate frames button here, move it to the right. And the name of this button is first going to be the cancel button, so this will be button cancel. The text will become cancel, and the dialog result will also become cancel. Now if you remember, setting a dialog result will cause the button to close the dialog with the result of what you specify here. So I'm going to duplicate this button, copy and paste it, and then this will be our OK button. So change the dialog result to OK, the text to OK, and the name to button OK. Right, so close down the designer. The next thing we want to do is only enable that button if it needs to be enabled. So actually, I'm going to go back to that dialog designer and disable it by default. So I'm going to set the enabled property to false. Okay, so now we only want to become enabled when it needs to be enabled, and that's when we have changes. So what we're going to do, because we have the useful functionality of having a source and modified, we can work out what the differences are. We also have the benefit of knowing that only frames are modified in this dialog, so they are the only thing we need to check. So all we need to do now is add another property for checking if there are any changes. So I'm going to create a public bool has changes, which has a simple get in there. And all this is going to do is compare if there are any changes between the source tileset frames and the modified tileset frames. Now because we use a list of structs for the frames, this is actually really simple. So all we need to do is return modified tileset.frames.accept and then pass in the source tileset.frames, which will actually return a list of the differences between them. So all we need to do is get a boolean from that, and to do that we can use the any method, okay, which is an extension by link. Okay, so that will just return true or false if there are any items in that list. So with that said, we now need to enable the OK button if there are any changes. So we'll create a method for handling the button state, private void update button state, and here I'm going to enable the button OK enabled equals has changes. So enabled to be true only if there are any changes. The last thing we need to do is just call this method once we refresh the frames. So we can do that down here, update button state. Okay, with that said, let's give that a quick run to make sure that's working as we expect. Hit start, select a tile set, full tile set, edit tile set. Here is our disabled OK button. Click generate frames, 32, 32, enter. We have our frames and we have our OK button enabled, which is perfect. So we're all but done with this dialog for now. We now just need to apply those changes to our source tile set. But I'm not going to make that a responsibility of this dialog. We're going to be doing that in the calling code back in the form. So heading back to the form1 code now, if we go to form1.cs, right click view code, head down to our button handler for opening the edit tileset dialog. In here, we need to do a check in here to make sure that we only perform some action if the dialog returned OK, i.e. we have some changes to be applied. So if dialog, show dialog is equal to OK. Now we know we can only ever enter this state if that button is enabled in the dialog, so we know we have some changes to apply. So what we need to do now is just simply apply the changes of the modified tileset back to the source tileset. So here we just need to go dialog.sourceTileset.apply dialog.modify tileset. And remember, this is the method we created earlier to merge one tileset to another. Okay, so let's give that a quick run and see how that works. Let's select our full tileset, edit tileset, generate frames, 32, 32. There's our frames, hit OK, but nothing's happened here. Well, if I select mini tileset, then select full tileset again, it has applied the changes, we just aren't re-rendering the tileset previewer, much like what happened to us before in the edit tileset dialog. So let's close that down real quick. And in here, we're going to pull out the tileset previewer, and then we're going to refresh frames like we did in the other dialog. Let's try this once more. Select our full tileset, edit tileset, generate frames, 32, 32, hit OK, and there we have our new frames generated for us. Now the question is, can we use them? Let's find out. Click, let's go through each of these. It's looking good. And that's a real good end product for us. Now the only problem with this is that we're not currently saving these tiles. Okay, if I close this down and reopen it, you saw yourself the changes are not there, they're not persisted. So what we need to do now is think about adding some final piece of functionality to save the changes to the tileset back to the JSON file where it came from. So to get that ball rolling, we're going to add one more method to the tileset class in the engine. So if we head over to that class now, in here we're going to add one more method for saving it to JSON. Public void save to JSON. Okay, this operation is pretty much going to be the inverse of what we did before to deserialize. So while here we read all text and deserialize, we now need to write all text and serialize. So in this method, we're going to do a file, write all text. The first argument is a path, which we don't yet know, so I'm just going to leave that as an empty string. And then the contents is going to be JSON convert serialize object this. Okay, so we're going to take this instance of a tile set and turn that into JSON, which is what's going to get written to this path, which we're going to specify in a moment. So we don't currently have this path, and we need to get the same path that's used when it's loaded in, so we need to store that information as we load the tile set in. So we're going to add one more property at the top here, public string file path get set, and then we're going to store that in the instance as we load it. File path. Okay, so now we have that piece of information. When we're saving back to JSON, we can just use it. So this can just be file path. Okay, so that's pretty much our tile set class wrapped up. If we close that down, you might remember before in the bootstrap class, if we open that, the bootstrap is responsible for loading all the tile sets. So it only makes sense that the bootstrap is responsible for saving them all as well. So we're going to add a public method in here, save tile sets. Okay, and then this is just going to loop through the tile sets. And then it's just going to, for each tile set, save to JSON. And that's it. Okay, so let's close down the bootstrap. And back in the form here, what we're going to do when we click OK and apply that tile set, we're then going to save to JSON at the same time. It's a little bit overkill to save all the tile sets like this, but it's all we need to do for now, and we're not worried about performance. We just need to know it saves all the tile sets and it keeps the files up to date. So now all we need to do here is just pull in the bootstrap and call save tile sets. So MonoGame editor 1, and I will rename this, I promise, it's driving me bonkers. Bootstrap.save tile sets. Okay, so I'm going to give this a run now and see what happens. So I'm going to hit full tile set, edit tile set, generate frames, 32, 32, hit OK. Oh no, we've got an error! Whatever could it be? Okay, so it's complaining about self-referencing loop detected for property graphics device with type yada 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 texture that graphics device instances. Okay, so what's happening there basically is if I scroll to the top here, it's trying to serialize all of these things. It's reaching the texture and realizes it can't serialize it and kind of falls over basically. So what we do is add a special attribute to texture to tell the system not to serialize it. And we do that by specifying in square brackets JSON ignore. Okay, and it's simple as that. If we hit start again, run through the same process again real quickly, 3232, and now hit OK, we had no errors. Okay, so what I'm going to do is close that down, start it up again, click full tile set, and there are our frames! They saved and they reloaded. It's beautiful. Okay, so also, because it's happened, it's now bloated our JSON file. So if we go back to full tile set and drag that in, you'll see he's fairly monumental and he's ugly as all hell. It's vomit worthy. But that's not a problem and we can solve that relatively easily as well. So let's close that down and head back to our save to JSON method. In here we just need to specify a formatter in this call to serialize object. So after this I'm going to type formatting dot indented. And that'll look a little bit more like the version we wrote ourselves. Hit start again. I'm going to regenerate the same frames, so edit tile set, 3232, enter. Oh, but of course it's not saying there are any difference because it's not recognizing any changes. So we know that functionality works as well. Okay, so I'm going to cancel that, close this down. I'm going to make a small change in the frames manually, which is going to be a bit awkward to pick out, but I'll just remove that one. Okay, hit start. And then do the same process. So full tile set, edit tile set. You'll see we're missing the first frame, so I just deleted it manually. 3232. We have an extra frame. OK is enabled. Hit OK. It should have saved it. Close it down. Relaunch. Has it saved? Yep, there's my first frame. Close it down. Now let's have a look at the format of the file. So drag full tileset JSON in. And here it is. It's pretty, but there's a lot of freaking data. And that's because, like I said previously, I'd like this to be much smaller, but you'd have to write your own type converter, which I can do if anyone's interested. It'd look a little bit more like this if we were. So it'd look like 32. You can't imagine it in a string like this. Each frame would look a little bit more like that. So it just breaks it down a little bit more and makes it easier to read. And there's not as much data in here. It's not as verbose. And that about covers it for today, chaps. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe. Please tune in for the next episode, which is going to be around tile layering. So you'll be able to effectively merge tile effects, so different tile types from one to another, grass to gravel, etc. It's a very useful tool to have in your belt when you're tile mapping. So please tune in. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much once more, and I'll speak to you soon.